arbitrarily give us these names that are to help us fulfill a destiny. So my name is Oba. My mother wanted to name me Obatala, but that's not, I wouldn't say allowed. It's just not a good idea. So to name your child an Orisha, so she settled on Oba.
Mm, mm. Well, that's a beautiful name, Oba.
Thank you.
And so let's explain because you were getting into what a Oba is a king, a Oba Oriate, master of ceremony. What is the difference between Oba and Oba Oriate?
Well, I mean, due to the circumstances that the people that at that time during slavery that they were affected by, there's the conversation that um, there was some a coup d'état, so to speak, like there was an upheaval in the government, and people became uh, prisoners of war, and they were sent. So now, because of the politics that were involved, when the people in the new that made it to the new world lost confidence in their government and in their hierarchy, and so they never wanted to be under a king again. Now, when it came to religious protocols, there was a time before the Oriate when different tasks were provided by people who knew what they were doing. And this was all consolidated by one man by the name of Obade Meji. And Obade Meji is known as the first Oriate of Cuba. And what that means is he consolidated a bunch of functions within the ritual and became proficient in them. And then he made just one job. And so the Oba is the king, or Riate, the head of the mat, because the Estera is very sacred to us in our tradition.
What is the difference between a Babalawo and an Oriate? And is there a hierarchy? Is one above the other? Are they equal? What is the standing in that?
Well, Ifa is a fraternity. Orunmila is one of many 401 Irumales that has a function. Its function is specifically for divination. So, because the Dilagoon is an antiquated system, meaning it's counted. It's you throw the shells and you count the amount of shells that are face up. The Iking, the palm nuts, um, are um, they don't have sides. They're round, and so you can't drop them and count them. So they created a binary system, right? And for that reason, the Dilagoon system has what we call a shadow. There is a moment when the Orishas can turn their backs on you. And when that happens, we are forced to use E5 because it doesn't have any blank spaces in its perspective. So everything that you throw, there is a conversation for it. Whereas in Dilagoon, when they throw and all the shells are face down, it is an indication that none of the Orisha are in the sacred grove and they're not answering questions. And this is when Ifa becomes effective to the Olorishas. Is a hierarchy that the Babalawo is somehow higher than the Oriate? Not necessarily, because he is a part of a fraternity that everybody else doesn't enter. So he has his authority with or his hierarchy within that cult, within that fraternity. But to call themselves higher priests above the Olorishas, no, that's absurd.
So even the Olarisha, so he's not above the Orate or the Olarisha or the Oba. He it's a separate fraternity. So a Babalao is its own fraternity in this world that people go when when that divination method, okay, has turned its back on that reader that's reading.
Well, no, it's not the fact that the system turned its back on it. That each set of cowrie shells has been consecrated to a specific orisha. When you're throwing those specific cowrie shells and you get what we call a shadow, that means that orisha not is not answering questions. They've turned their back on you because the orishas could be capricious. They are not God. Now Orunmila, because of his circumstances, becomes he has no he has no dog in that race, so he's impartial to it. So what happens is he becomes the diviner that has no blank, that has no he can see 360. And you have to understand historically that cult was introduced into Yoruba land by way of the Alafin of Oyo. And it took many generations for them to even grasp to it, because the Yorubas were not into worshiping palm nuts. And then what happened is that the palm oil production became very viable. And then palm nuts became a commodity or a means of currency. And so that currency usurped the currency of a cowrie shell, which was the original currency of not just West Africa, the old entire ancient world at one time.
So you know what? I might have to back this up because there's people out here that are Hebrew Israelites. There's people that are watch me that are Moorish. Some people don't understand the divination aspect. They don't understand the cowrie shell. They don't understand the palm nuts, the significance of it, like what the difference is. So I have a very wide, broad. There's Christians here, ex Jehovah Witnesses
So
that come and watch.
historically, so let's
Yeah.
understand that historically we are taking the narrative of a conqueror, people who sat down and wrote the books. Now you have to understand one of the things that is that doesn't allow the Orisha people to defend themselves is because all of the Abrahamic faiths are literal. They are written in a book. But if we go back to antiquity, we will understand that originally writing and arithmetic was not made to record history. It was made to record commerce. When the world changed to grain, right? So before grain, they say that the first currency of the world was salt, right? This is when man was a hunter-gatherer. He has no refrigeration, and in order to maintain the integrity of the meat, you put salt on it so it doesn't go bad. So salt, this is where you get the connotation, you're worth your weight in salt. The second currency in the world, and this has nothing to do, because people will use the Bible as a historical reference, but this has nothing to do with that. This has to do with true human nature and the evolution of man. Before they were writing anything, human beings, after salt, the second currency that human beings traded and bartered was corn kernels, because you can count them. I can take a cob of corn and shuck it, and I can count all the kernels, and I can charge you based on that. When rice became cultivated and traded in the world, rice and other grains, wheat and other grains, things that were not tangibly counted, you couldn't count them. When rice came into the world, there had to be a measure or a mechanism to record it, because my hand is not the equivalent of your hand. So a hand of rice, let's just say hypothetically a hand of rice was $2. I get more rice than you would because your hand is not as big as mine. So there's no equality in that. And for that reason, man created the scale. And when he created the scale to weigh the grain, he had to record it. This is why even in the Hebrew Israelites can't dispute this, that their alphabet is connected, has a numerical value to it. So that the original letters were not really even letters, they were really numbers, right? To keep record of the amount of grain that was being sold or brought in. So that system of writing and arithmetic was only for commerce. Now, the Abrahamic faith will lean on the literal word, when the rest of the antiquitable world was all oral. Now, oral is superior because it requires memory, right? So that they say that the Pygmy, the Twa people that come out of the Ndoki forest of the Congo, they can identify up to 25 to 3,500 plants by sight. That's by memory. They don't need a book for that, which this is a show of higher intelligence. So when you try to compare something that comes from an oral tradition to a tradition that's written, you cannot take the oral literal. And so this becomes the problem when those people that come from Abrahamic faith are trying to understand what we do here. So we have a divination system made over 16 cowrie shells. The 16 cowrie shells are charged by the blood of the animals based on the fact that the blood of the animals has iron in it. And so these shells are being magnetized. Once they're magnetized, when they're brought around the person's aura and to the cardinal points of the body, and then they're cast and then counted, that will give us a diagnostic of the person's metaphysical aura around them. You understand? So this system allows us to understand what is happening with the person beyond just their will, because there are other forces in the universe that are affecting us all the time. Radio waves, radiation, gamma rays. There's all these different forces that we are subject to. So the divination is a diagnostic to see what the metaphysical temperature is upon a person, to decide what kind of situations they might come upon, because the energy or the frequency responds to whatever frequency it's around. So if you come with a negative frequency because you're charged up, when you go into a peaceful space, you will instigate that space and create a negative charge to it. So the divination is all scientific. It's not, it has really less to do with folklore than it has more to do with science.
So, all right. So what's the difference between like a tarot reading versus
Well, the tarot reading, the cards are not consecrated with blood.
So that blood is making that element.
Blood contains iron in it, right? So when you put something that has iron on it, you magnetize something. And when you magnetize something, you give it the ability to do one of two things, either attract or repel. So all of the logic behind these traditions is the ability to take a diagnostic test and then level a person out based on different attributes or different things, whether it be water, leaves, certain prescriptions that will change the ions around you, around your orbit, so that when you move, you don't attract the wrong things and you repel all of the bad things.
So as an Oba Oriete, you are the person that runs the ceremony, right? Mm-hmm. So the person gets the reading that is charged, and and you're the one that gives the person their life reading, not a Babalawo. So even though you have a Babalawo that can give you 16-day reading, the Oba is the one that can tell you what's going to happen in your life during initiation.
Well, here's the thing. With Ifa, there is no they're giving you a signal that they say that you cast in heaven, but you still have free will. You don't have to submit to that destiny, right? Destiny is always changing. But when you knock on the door to the Igbodu and Kadiocha, you are signing a contract with the Orishas that you are allowing the Orishas to be installed in your consciousness, so that you at some point will be able to be the vehicle for the Orisha, albeit dancing, drumming, singing, initiating people, cooking food, sewing clothes. You are expressing the Orisha's creativity through your medium. You took that contract when you knocked on the door, because you didn't have to do it. So you allow this deity to be installed in your consciousness. Now there is it's a reciprocity to it. So the Orishas are now going to give you a heads up about what this life is going to be like and what to look out for. Again, you still have free will. You don't have to follow the prescriptions of what they say. You can do it as you like. So when the difference between Ifa is that Ifa gives you your hand of Ifa, and this is supposed to be when you didn't have any conscious decision in what you were doing. You made this decision in heaven. When you make Kadiocha, you make this decision consciously here on earth to be a part of. So now, why do you make Kadiocha? Why?
You're asking me?
Yes, it's rhetorical.
Well, yeah, because I believe that, like, usually you get a reading that says that either you have to do it, or usually there's a life or death situation, or usually you're called to do it in some some way, either through a reading from a Babalawo or a Olorisha that says that you should do Osho.
Okay. So one day when I was about 18, 19 years old, I had this conversation with my dear grandmother, who was a priest of Obatala. And my grandmother asked me, she said, do you still want to make Ocho? And I was like, I don't really like the people. She was like, it ain't about them. And at the time, I had my Nganga, I was a Palero, I had my little stuff that I thought, I could do to defend myself. And I asked her, I was like, well, what's the big deal? Why I got to make Ocho? And my grandmother said, very, very matter-of-factly, so you could live forever. And when she said it, it went over my head and under my feet, as I tell the story all the time. I didn't push any further. I left that statement right there. I don't know what the time frame was. It was a couple months. It was less than a year. One day she and I were in the kitchen and we returned to this conversation, right? And I asked her, what you mean by live forever? And she said, when one goes to submit to making Kariocha, to doing the ceremony, you are proverbially dead. And they are going to revive you and resurrect you with a new name. Now, this name may be recycled. There may be hundreds of Santeros that have had this name before you. But as long as this tradition is being continued on and we continue the ritual of reciting the names of the dead priests, if your name is attached to that ritual name, you get lifted up and not forgotten.
Wow. So what is the significance of being not forgotten? I know we have our ancestor altars that we do. Is there like a reason why we have that? Is the ancestors like we were putting the water on there, we're putting the things on there? Are they eating in some other realm? Like what exactly is the science behind
imagine that? So it's memory that we are offering them. So like in my book, Glass of Water and the Candle, I talk about the first actual sacrifice that you perform when involving yourselves in any of these traditions is time and space. Time and space are two things that you can give freely, but you do not have control over. So in your home, you dedicate a space to the altar, right? That's a sacrifice. You could have put something else there. You could have put a TV, a bookshelf, some other shit there. But you put this altar there. So that was the sacrifice of space. And then the sacrifice of time that it took you to erect the altar and to maintain it in the time that you spent meditating at it. These two things you can give freely. You can give your time freely, and you can give your space up freely, but you don't control those things. Now, with that understanding of time and space, we, the ancestors, the spirits, those who have died, are connected to this world by way of memory, right? Because the idea is that nobody wants to get shot down in the curb and die and be forgotten. Nobody wants that, right? You see people that they could have been evil their whole life, on their deathbed, they get to start changing up like, oh, please don't. They don't want to be forgotten, right? You don't want your life to be insignificant in this time, in this world. So what you do, all of the things that you do in this life are to gain acknowledgement for your existence here, right? This is why people write graffiti. They say such and such was here, right? And so spirits, those who have lived and died, are attached to the memory of this reality that they were in. So they're attached. This is why you get houses that are haunted, because the spirit it recognizes the home. There's energy signature there that the spirit is like, I know this place. And they hover around it because it's familiar, right? So you do the same effects when you create your altar. You put the picture there, and then you put the glass of water, and then maybe some flowers, and all of these different things that you're giving have to do with the four elements that you want spirit to be able to speak to you through as a conduit. So we have the water, we have the candle for the fire, we have the flowers or the incense for earth, because your sense of smell is a part of your earth sense, right? And then you have prayer or sound for the air. So those four elements are the dimension that we are really trapped in. We are trapped in the dimension of four elements. Now, we have five senses, so they say, but the sense of feeling is subject only to you. Nobody else feels what you feel. So there's no truth in that. right? But you could be someplace and it's hot, everybody else is sweating, and you're like, I'm cold. Nobody has to feel what you feel, right? And so there's no truth in that. But what there is a truth is there's a truth in what you see. We can all agree that we see, yeah, you see it, I see it. Okay, we agree. You heard it, we agree upon it. Did you smell it? We agree upon it. Whether you like it or not, that is of no consequence. You can acknowledge that you smell something burning or you smell this foul smell of something. Well, something is ripe or decayed, right? And then your sense of water, which is attached to your dreams, because even when you sleep, you swallow, right? So these four forces are what the dimension in which you're stuck in. And you present these things to the altar as a means to identify to your spirits that one of these mediums they have to contact you through.
So what about food when you give food to the altar? Does that
It's
mean
it's the memory. It's the idea of the memory. The idea that they see something that they recognize, that they saw, that they felt joy in it.
oh, so it's like you showing that you listen, you're not okay.
You're feeding their memory. So even when we perform the ritual, understand that so if you acknowledge the fact that there is something greater than us and it is observing us, yes?
Yes.
So if it's observing us, it watches the patterns that we perform to give it a context of what's happening here in our domain. Yes?
Yes.
So if we took a petri dish and we heated it up and we look under the microscope, the fact that the bacteria or whatever's in there is moving around very quickly would give us the indication that maybe it's hot in there. So them doing that would indicate to me that I need to turn the heat down.
Yeah.
So the ritual is the same way. When the people come into the ritual and they go in a certain semicircle and then they're going counterclockwise, when the deity is watching, the deity recognizes this behavior. And so it says, oh, they're doing Awan, for instance. They're doing a ceremony for Babaluaye. Someone must be sick. So let's offer or look for the spirit of health to come and participate in this event.
Peace and blessings, John Madison. Yes, please. I want to just give a shout out to Texas Bama, Infinite Energy Source, people that are coming in. But yeah, we're getting into it. So listen, before I know you're gonna drop a lot of bombs on us, but I really want to first just let people know why. Because when I ran into Brother Oba, right, I had gotten initiated in Cuba, and it was 100% Spanish. I didn't understand anything that was going on, but I got my Olokun initiation from him. Okay, Olokun is the Orisha of the depths of the ocean, right? And I got to finally see what exactly happens when you get your initiation. And let me tell you something. Oba Oriente is a library, because and the thing is that you end up missing sometimes when you get initiated, like in other countries, is that with other languages you miss the conversations that are had between the elders. The one thing that I got to see is how much knowledge that these Oba Orientes really have, because even the Oriente that I had, he was only 29, was very, very versed. I mean, you have to memorize so many things, songs, Odu, ceremony, everything. Let's get into what your origins are, where you came from, why is it, where'd you come, who are you, who is Brother Oba, who is Oba?
Okay, so like I said, my family has been involved in these traditions since 1968. These traditions, only the first Americans to get involved in this got initiated in 1959, right? So 8 years later, from the original people that got a hold of these traditions, my family has been involved 8 years after that. So by the time I was born, my grandmother was getting prepared to be initiated. I was born in 1977. My grandmother was initiated in 1979. So I don't really remember her without Ocha, right? As far as I can remember, she's always had Obatala in the house. All of the adults in my family, my uncles, my aunts, and even one of my cousins were all initiated by 1987. So I had uncles that were trained as orientate. Both my uncles, Ibaete, my uncle Charles, Bobby Charles, he made Ocha in 1980. His Ajibon Khan was the second black orientate in the world. Alfred Davis. Their orientate at the time was the first black orientate in the world, who was Leonard Simmons. Shango Day. He went on and passed it to Ifa later on and became Ifa Alafia. So when I was a kid, these people who had gotten the religion straight from the people that came from Cuba, because Renard could speak a little bit of Spanish as well as Alfred, whatever jewelry they dropped about the religion, I was right there to pick up because I was there as my elders were being taught. I was being taught as well. So by the time I got to be in my teens, I had already been in, like, my best friend's mother lived on Quincy Street. She right now is probably like that, the elder of one of the most prolific black American houses in the United States, Ile Ashe. His mother lived on Quincy Street. There was an open in her house every weekend. So all of these customs are very, very familiar to me. It's not something that I have to even think about because it's so natural. I did not grow up understanding God. I always knew Olofi. I always knew Olegba. I always knew Obatala. I always knew Shango, Yemonja, Oshun, Againju, Oya. These Orishas were in all of the houses that I frequented. So if I went to Thanksgiving, there might be a misa in my house because the old people in my house going to get to singing some songs and they get to singing some Negro spirituals. One of my uncles in my house going to get possessed. And so it's a part of my culture. So when I got to my teens, I was disillusioned with the tradition because of the politics and things of that nature. Because you have to understand that these traditions, they've only been here for 60 years, and I'm 47. So they hadn't gotten a real foundation together yet. They were initiating people. So you have to understand, as a child, you might be 9 years old and somebody comes into the house and they've been around for a couple of months, and next thing you know, they make an Ocha. They become your elder, but you kind of like schooled this person because they might have been in the room with the kids and asking you what was going on because they were a neophyte, right? So when there's a drumming going on and somebody get possessed, and all of the kids are in one room watching TV, right? And we all in one room watching TV. We're kind of like a family, just like cousins, because all of these children are all together at these ceremonies. So when the people get possessed and they come looking for the children, and there might be a neophyte that's in the room with us because they can't participate in all of the ceremonies. And they don't know nothing, and we have to educate them. But then later on, this person might make Orisha before, they might go make Ocha before you. They become your elder, so it became a very strange dynamic. Needless to say, I had my time in the street from my environment. And when my mom was sick, she made me promise that I would go get myself a crown. She was like, there's nothing else. She's like, I never asked you to go to graduate from high school, from college. I didn't ask you to bring me no grandchildren. I just asked you that you would make sure that you get yourself a crown before you close your eyes. And so I did that. And after she passed away, and my life changed. And the Orishas were waiting for me. So I had an Ita that was telling me that, like, what we're doing right now, they talked about this 19 years ago. And so this is how I got into my groove. So being an Orientate was just, it was just natural. So every time I got around these elders, they already had an anticipation of me. So they gave me things before I was even had the license, right? Because I was holding goats and helping them, assisting them in ceremonies before I was made, because they knew what my destiny was. So I was luckily enough to be around a lot of old timers, right? People that had, because in the beginnings of American Ocha, you got to understand that if somebody had 10, 15 years of Ocha, that was a lot. So they are still subject to the amount of information that they've been exposed to. Whereas later on, I got to be around Cubans that they were in their 50s and 60s in Ocha. They had seen Ocha change through the colonial times, through modern times. So they had a very, very genuine perspective on it, right? So that I could tell you when certain things changed, when certain things became all of a sudden new. Like there was when I grew up, there was no such thing as an Iyanifa. There was no such thing, right?
And that is like a prominent thing in Isheshe, where in Nigeria, right?
Now, but you could go back to any publication that was made before 1980 that was written about the Yorubas and anything on Ifa, and you will not find the Iyanifa.
What is the difference between Isheshe and Osha?
So Isheshe, so let's start with the fact that historically Isheshe didn't exist until about less than 20 years ago.
Wait, Isheshe didn't exist. Wait,
No,
Osha.
there was no such thing as Isheshe 25 years ago.
What?
So you have to understand, these traditions got here by way of the purveyors or the propagators of these traditions start by it's a line, there's a lineage. So the first person to indulge in any ATRs in the Americas is Catherine Dunham and Zora Neale Hurston. They got a grant to go and collect as much folkloric slave information as they could. In them doing that, they got a grant, and in the grant, they were allowed to go to certain Caribbean spots in the diaspora so that they could try to contrast and compare some of the rituals and some of the customs. When they got to Haiti, the Mambos there told Catherine Dunham that they were waiting for her. And so on her second trip or something like that, she was initiated into Ndambala Wedo. This was in the 1950s, well, like late 40s, early 50s. Dizzy Gillespie brought a man by the name of Chano Pozo from Havana to New York as for percussion. Chano Pozo introduced him to Machito, Chucho Valdez, Mango Santa Maria, all of these different Cuban performers that came. So they began to migrate to the United States. This is prior to the revolution. This is in the time of Batista. In 1959, a student by the name of Walter King, Osurgimen Adefumi I, got with a man by the name of Cristobal Oleana. Right? Cristobal Oleana was half from Curacao and half Cuban. He used to compete in these Rumba dance contests. In one of these dance contests, he won a trip to Havana to compete in another contest. When he went to compete, he danced so well that the people there invited him to a toke, but he thought he was going to a party. When he got there, they were playing drums and shakeras and people were getting possessed. And they told him that they were waiting for him to come back. So at this time, Baba Osurgimen started the House of Dambala. They had like a cadre of people that were intellectuals and they were occultists. They included Ed James, Cristobal Oleana, a woman by the name of Marie, Adefumi's first wife, Jane King. So these people were occultists. They were into occult and they studied. So in the conversation between Cristobal Oleana and King Adefumi, they came to the conclusion that they were doing this Yoruba thing in Cuba. And so he took him to Cuba. They went to Cuba. They went to Matanzas. In 1959, at the same time, a Puerto Rican woman from New York by the name of Asunta Serrano was being set. She got initiated that same month, but a couple of weeks earlier. These people became the pillars of Orisha traditions in the United States. Now, at this time, the Nigerians were not giving Yoruba traditions to people because you have to understand it's connected to families and clans and tribes. So there was a group of people who did not like the Cuban aesthetic. They said it was too Spanish. They didn't like it because they were trying to get away from anything that was supposedly white or Catholic. And so these people began to go to Nigeria and look for ways to get initiated. Now, in the early days, from the 70s to the 80s, there were people, and they were usually scholastic people, people that were into academics, that they went to Nigeria and they became initiated. But what happens is from town to town in Nigeria, they have a different style of initiation and different customs, and it did not all match up at the same time. So what happened was,
wasn't Desi Arnaz also a practitioner as well?
Yeah, he had Obatala made. So what they did was they started going to Nigeria. Now, at the same time, my mother's godfather, by the name of Baba Lloyd Weaver, Olosunmi, who made Yemonja in the Bronx, he was working for CBS at the time. He was a film producer, and some friends of his said that there were more opportunities in Lagos, Nigeria, for a black man in film, and so he migrated to Lagos after creating a very strong Ocha house in Brooklyn. When he got to Nigeria, he became involved with a lot of the politics because he kind of like was involved with the television. So when you understand Nollywood and all of the fact that the Nigerians have their own production thing, he is one of the people that taught them how to do that. So Baba Lloyd began to facilitate people who did not want to do Lukumi. So they would come to Nigeria, and he would facilitate them and take them to the town or whatever Orisha they said that this person necessarily had to make. Over time, the Nigerians realized that there was money in this racket of tradition. And so a few key players started to write books, and they started to come and they started to create these environments, particularly for rich white people.
Were those book writers white, or were they actual Babalawos in Nigeria? Were they white people?
What is that?
That wrote those books?
Huh?
Were those white people that wrote those books, or were they like Nigerians that wrote the books?
Originally there were white folks. So like the most profound and prolific books on the Yoruba culture are written in German, actually. German, then secondly French, and then you get to Spanish, and then you understand?
You know what? Now that I think about it, wasn't the Oshun Grove made a UNESCO site by a white woman? Yeah. Wow. So
she saved Susan Wegner saved the Oshun Grove because she got there. It was a dump site.
Wow.
So this is how they got to Isheshe. So what happens is the Babalawo saw a profit in this. They could bring people to Nigeria, initiate them, but they had to get the people in the compounds to agree. So the compound people are not missionaries. There's nothing about these traditions that where we go on a missionary and we start telling people what they should come and do. So what they did was, because the people in the compounds, they don't make money, so because they don't leave, they're stuck in these compounds where these Orisha live. They got to take care of these Orisha. They are dedicated to it, right? So the Babalawos come along and they're like, listen, we're going to bring this person over here and you're going to initiate them to whatever it is. Let's say this in this grove, they got Yemonja. They're like, you're going to initiate the person to Yemonja, and then we're going to take the person to Ifa. If you say something, we ain't feeding y'all, because they're the ones making the moves, getting in and out. So the Orisha people became subject to the Babalawos, their racket. So that everybody that goes over there, so that you very rarely see somebody that got Isheshe that don't got Ifa.
Right. Wow. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So now, the second part is, so what happened was when people came back, they had no continuity. So like somebody got made in Oderemu, somebody got made in Oshogbo, somebody else got made in Ibadan, someone else got made in Ogun State, in Ilorin, right? So when you come back and you're in the States and you're like, yeah, so did they do this to you? And they're like, nah, they didn't do that to me, because each person had a different experience. So what the Babalawos did was they created an association, because first they had what they call these Ijos, which were these councils or these groups. And they were trying to get all of the Orisha people under the Ijo, Rumila, blah, blah, blah. So then they came up with a word. So if you understand the language, there's a word in Yoruba, the word for shishe or sese is work. So if you put the word, the letter I in front of something in Yoruba, it denotes that it has some kind of context to something ethereal. So for instance, you have Ibaye. right? The word Ibaye, the
Yeah.
E in it refers to something that's ethereal. So now you take Sheshe or Shishe, which is a word for work, and if you put E in front of it, it becomes Isheshe. And what does Isheshe mean? It means holy work. So they came up with this so that they would have a name for the people, what kind of style of Ocha that they had. So, because Lukumi, what happened was in Lukumi, when the slaves started coming off the boats at a certain time, people were saying that there was I am the Araba of this, and I got this title. And the slaves like, yo, I don't know you from back home like that. I don't remember you. So what we're going to do is we're going to make us a rule. So they created what they call Regla Ocha. So that the Lukumi style of Ocha has a rule. There's rules and parameters to it. So that there are common denominators of nuances that must be performed for us to accept that you had a legitimate initiation.
Wow, so it's almost like the Osha in Cuba is you know what's so crazy is that when I got initiated, the Babalao said this is the origin.
Well, okay, now there's a whole lot of scholastic and academic conversation. So the original conversation was that Lukumi was a word that the slaves used that meant my friend because they had made it across the water, and that they somehow had this fragmented concept of Orisha, and they came together and they kind of put it together in a puzzle. Now, unfortunately, and this is not by research of my own, but there's a book called Olukumi Kingdom. And it refers to the fact that there are a group of Yorubas that had all of the nuances and styles that we perform in Cuba. These people were taken out of Africa for a particular commodity because at the time they cultivated Efun. Efun is originally made of a limestone chalk. And so there was a limestone quarry that, imagine if you can imagine Detroit is a factory town. So you got a bunch of
limestone or salt or whatever, right?
Right, but imagine let's just say, like, for instance, when Detroit became big, everybody from the South migrated to Detroit for work, right? So you got people from Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Louisiana, Arkansas. All these people come into Detroit to come get this work. But they bring their customs with them so that Detroit becomes its own melting pot and has its own style, right?
Right.
So this place, Olukumi, in Yoruba land, because it was so much work, people from all over West Africa came there to get work, because we have this concept that West Africans didn't exchange amongst each other, which is not true. So if you can imagine that when any one of those empires, albeit Mali, Ghana, whatever, Songhai, there were people from other provinces and other places that came there for work. So in this cadre, these people created a system and a pantheon because somebody came from a specific town where Yemonja was there with their saving grace, and they brought that custom with them. Somebody else came and said Oshun was their saving grace. So in this town is where they authenticated and created this pantheon of a hierarchy of which Orisha was above who and what in a genesis of them. You understand?
Right. That happened in Africa before it came to
before it came here. So that all of the scholars got to rewrite the books, because this book, The Lukumi Kingdom, it talks about this group of people, because the word Yoruba did not exist until 1840. It was not used by them. They did not call themselves Yorubas. Right? So you get into the history that Yorubas, there's a Dr. O. Johnson. Their missionaries needed a way to convert the people, but they needed a Bible. But the Yorubas speak different dialects amongst each tribe, each clan. So they came up with using the Oyo dialect, which was the tradable, because Oyo was in power at the time, economically. They used that dialect and it became Yoruba proper. But the Yoruba word comes from the epithet from the Fulani people who called them Yagbas. So if you ask a Yoruba today, some of them will say, I'm not Yoruba, I'm Edo.
I've heard that before. Yeah.
Because he has all of the same customs as them, but he'd be like, no, I'm Edo. So from state to state, they got different, like I said, it takes 3 families to make a clan. It takes 3 clans to make a tribe. Remember, because a tribe is three. Tri. Tribe is 3 clans, and then 3 tribes makes a nation. So the Yoruba nation, you have the Ibadan, the Abeokuta, the Ketu, the Egbado, the Egba, the Ife, the Oyo, the Ogbomosho, the Ilorin, the Ijebu, the Ijesa. There's all these different groups of people that they don't consider themselves Yoruba. So
Wow.
this Yoruba title came because they needed a way to convert them. So there was like a whole era where when black people got with the Cubans and they was like, yeah, this is from Yoruba, and they was like, who? They're like,
Right. No, that's Lu
that's not what
Kumi.
we remember as
So Lu Kumi was a group too, or was it?
It was
considered...
a group of people from the Olukumi. It's a city state within Oyo. The people there call themselves Igala people. It's in what they call Antioquia country, right? In Yoruba land. I checked the maps and all of that. They explain that this custom of Ocha that came into Cuba was not created in Cuba. Now, the person in Cuba that was given the credit for it is a woman by the name of Efuche Warikando. Efuche, some people say she had Obakalame, some people say she had Ochosi name because this is before the turn of the century. This lady set the standard. She set what was going to be the regular Ocha. Her and her contemporaries. She had contemporaries like Aina Yoko. She had who else? Mama Montserrat. She had there was these other women who were very proficient in the customs. Now,
and this was after the slave trade, or was it during?
This is like there's still some slave because Cuba didn't come out of slavery until 1880.
Okay.
20 years after our emancipation, right? So like 1880 is when they come out of it. But there's kind of slavery was not like what we had over here in the continental United States. So that they had movement. They was moving around, right? But there was a count. They had to be back at a certain place or whatever. So they had some kind of movement that was allowing them to do what they were able to do.
And still be able to like hide it and do this and do that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of misnomers. Like you get the whole conversation of, they hid it behind the scenes. That's like a broad cliche. It was a little bit more complicated than that. And the word Santeria is really an epithet. It's not like if you said that to the people 80 years ago, they probably curse you out.
Yeah, the word Santeria is not
it's an
like
epithet.
what it's called.
It's an epithet. Yo soy Lukumi, that's what they're gonna tell you.
Here's the question. So you talked about how even Babalaos were the ones that even brought us into slavery. Can you go into that about who sold us into the slavery? Like, because you say that there was this Lukumi group, right? But then you have Babalaos throughout Yoruba land, right?
Well, no, they weren't originally throughout Yoruba land, like I said. So there's one of the most prolific scholars on all of this is Baba John Mason. He has maps. He has a lot of the historical information, right? We talk about the interactions with them between the Fulani and the Igbo, right, and the Hausa people. The Hausa and the Fulani were converted to Islam very early, so they kind of came into West Africa and brought Islam in by the sword. Okay, Ifa at the time was a divination system of nomads. And Shango, the Alafin, the Shango town of Oyo, imparted Ifa because he needed a system that nobody else had access to, right? So he needed a one-up on his enemies or his adversaries. So he began to utilize Ifa as a means of a forecast for him. Then after the slave trade was real heavy, because you got to understand that there's no evidence of Babalaos in Cuba for 150 years. Like Orisha was going on for 150 years before the Babalao showed up. There is no evidence of the Babalao in Candomblé. There is no evidence of
Oh.
Babalaos in Vodun in Haiti. There is no evidence of Babel. There's no evidence of Ifa proliferating itself outside of Cuba.
So Babalawo is something that came later on.
Certainly. And so what happens is you have to imagine that. So there's two things that they don't talk about in the slave trade. They don't talk about the economics of the slave trade. They're not just talking about the people and how what they were commodities, but you have to understand that the currency at the time was a cowrie shell. When the Portuguese showed up and saw that the cowrie shell was their method of currency, they went back to the Mediterranean and brought as many cowrie shells back as they could. And what they did was they gave it to the people who were, for lack of words, who were disenfranchised. And so it's just imagine if you gave $1 billion to the worst projects in whatever city you want. Those people are going to affect the entire city's, all of their etiquette and everything, because now you got people from the projects that are going into Shea Whitey's and they got on sneakers and they ain't got no collar shirt and they're like, I don't need no collar shirt. And they pay the money, and they neglect all of the etiquette of the society. You understand? So
some hood niggas that just got some cowrie shells, and now they like fuck everything. And
well, you have to
I'm making it rain with the cowrie shell.
Right. Well, all civilized societies have a wall to keep somebody the fuck out. They ain't to keep nobody in. And so they got this wall because you, at some point, we have a divination system. We don't have to figure it out. We know who's going to be obtuse to society, right? Exactly. We ain't fit to feed your stupid ass.
And then them people that's obtuse get sent out to the community, right?
Right. So now you get cast out. Those people get cast out. They, at some point, they're going to start to gather together because they need each other for resources. You understand?
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. So if you give them niggas money and they can show up in the town and buy everything, they're going to change all of the etiquette. Dynamic society. Right?
Right.
So that was one of the things that they did to offset the government and the society of life over there.
Wow.
The other part
I'm gonna just say this. I think, listen, this is not just a history lesson of Orisha, but this is actually because this. Let me tell you how significant this is, because people just think that we just came over here and just the Africans just sent us over here, but there's an actual story, and he's given the story what really happened. So this is very, very, very serious, like very important to like know that. Thank God that we have a person, Oriate, that knows the history. And Oriates, like I said, they are the librarians. They are the history books. Let's continue. I'm sorry.
So we understand that these people, like I said, they were disenfranchised, and so they got into power by ways of money, right? Then you also have to understand. So when we look very plainly, very simply, West Africa used cowrie shells as a means of currency. The Orishas used cowrie shells as a means of dilagoons. That is their mouth. Orunmila does not have dilagoons. He has palm nuts. So it is safe to say that there was a change of currency that happened in West Africa due to the production of palm oil, because palm nuts became the thing that Ifa was so sacred, correct?
Yeah, and also that actually talks about the also not only the dynamic of finances, but also the male and female relationship, because only men could actually read.
And originally, the Orisha culture was matriarchal. You understand?
Very matriarchal, yes. And so that was the switch. That whole switch of currency became what made it less.
So you got to imagine that the people who were sent to places like Cuba and Brazil might have been people of royal lineages. There's a coup d'etat that's happening, right?
Makes a lot of sense. And even America. And that is why when we came over here, we were able to build everything, because I knew it was something that made us special. I was like, how, if we're not the like people, they sent over all the best people. You know what I'm saying? How is it that you're not developed over there? You sent your best people over here.
No, because they betrayed us. So there's a name that they give to Orunmila and Ifa in Yoruba land. They call him Agbomirere. Now, when we understand the language, Agbo is a ram. And the ram within Yoruba philosophy and folklore is a traitor. Okay? He is the symbol of treachery and betrayal. So that Oya does not eat ram because he betrayed her. Okay?
Wow. Makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Okay, so now when you look at the fact that so much so that this whatever this betrayal was,